It all began in a small, rainy country called England. But this isn't just the story of England. This is the story of a transformation. This is how a tiny island with muddy roads, unpredictable weather, and a taste for tea somehow grew into a global empire, ruling over a quarter of the world's population at its height. Yes, this is the story of the British Empire, its astonishing rise and its inevitable fall. Let's set the stage. It's the 16th century, the age of exploration. European countries are racing to discover new lands, find riches, and spread their influence. Spain and Portugal are out in front, building huge empires in South America, Africa, and Asia. England, meanwhile, is a bit late to the party, but soon enough, the English catch on. They look at what Spain and Portugal are doing and think, why can't we do that too? And so, the English set sail. Adventurers, merchants, and privateers, pirates with permission from the Queen, are off to explore the seas, hoping to find something valuable. Sir Francis Drake is one of these privateers. A bit of a troublemaker, Drake goes around raiding Spanish ships, stealing their gold, and bringing it back to England. The Spanish are furious, but the English are delighted. Drake becomes a hero, and the English crown realizes there's potential here. If England wants to get rich, if it wants to matter in the world, it's going to need some colonies. The first colonies, America and the Caribbean. England's first attempts at colonization don't go so well. They try to settle in North America, but it's a rough start. In 1585, they establish a colony called Roanoke. A few years later, they return to check on it, and everyone has vanished. To this day, no one really knows what happened to them. It's a bit of a mystery, but England doesn't give up. In 1607, they finally get it right with Jamestown in Virginia. It's a small settlement, tough and scrappy, and it struggles at first. But then they discover tobacco, and everything changes. Smoking becomes all the rage in Europe, and Virginia starts exporting tobacco by the boatload. Suddenly, there's money to be made, and more colonies start popping up along the American coast. Not long after, England sets its sights on the Caribbean. The islands are warm, lush, and, as it turns out, perfect for growing sugar. Sugar is in high demand in Europe, and soon, English planters are getting rich off their Caribbean colonies. But there's a dark side to this wealth. To grow all that sugar, England turns to enslaved labor. Thousands of Africans are forcibly taken from their homes, shipped across the Atlantic, and put to work in brutal conditions on the sugar plantations. This dark chapter becomes a fundamental part of the British Empire, fueling its economy, but at a terrible human cost. The East India Company. Business with a bang now. Let's move east to India. In 1600, the English set up the East India Company. It's a business at first, just trying to make money by trading spices, silks, and teas. But over time, the East India Company starts acting more like a mini-country. It has its own army, its own forts, and its own way of doing things. The company's influence in India grows steadily. They're not just doing business. They're getting involved in politics, making deals with local rulers, and sometimes even fighting wars to get what they want. India becomes the crown jewel of the British Empire. The wealth flowing out of India, cotton, spices, opium, makes England richer than ever. By the 18th century, the East India Company is so powerful that it's practically ruling parts of India on its own. But this kind of control doesn't sit well with everyone, and tensions begin to rise. The empire expands: Canada, Australia, and Africa. Meanwhile, back in North America, things aren't going quite as smoothly. England's colonies along the Atlantic coast are growing restless. They're tired of British taxes, British soldiers, and British rules. By 1776, they've had enough and declare independence. The American Revolution breaks out, and after a long struggle, England loses. The United States of America is born, and the British Empire takes a hit. But the empire isn't about to give up just yet. Instead, England looks elsewhere. To the north, it has Canada. Canada remains loyal to the crown, and England sees it as a place where they can still hold on to some power in North America. To the south, in the Caribbean, they still control sugar-rich islands like Jamaica. And on the other side of the world, there's Australia. In 1788, England begins sending convicts to Australia. turning it into a penal colony. But Australia is more than just a prison. It's a land of opportunity. Over time, more settlers arrive, and Australia becomes another valuable part of the empire. Then there's Africa. The 19th century brings the scramble for Africa, when European countries race to carve up the continent for themselves. England joins in, establishing colonies all over, from Egypt to South Africa. They're after gold, diamonds, and other resources, and they're not too concerned about the people who live there. The empire spreads across Africa, bringing new territories and new riches. The Victorian era, empire at its peak. By the time Queen Victoria takes the throne in 1837, the British Empire is enormous. It stretches across the globe, and the saying, "the sun never sets on the British Empire," becomes popular. And it's true. The empire has colonies in every corner of the world. Queen Victoria becomes a symbol of British power, ruling over an empire that includes Canada, Australia, India, large parts of Africa, and countless islands. This is the peak of the British Empire, and it's also a time of technological progress. The Industrial Revolution is in full swing, and British factories are churning out goods faster than ever. Trains, steamships, and telegraphs connect the empire like never before. Raw materials come into Britain from the colonies, and manufactured goods are shipped back out. It's a cycle that keeps the empire wealthy and powerful, but not everyone is happy with British rule. In India, for example, there's growing resentment. The East India Company's rule has become harsh, and local customs are often ignored. In 1857, a major uprising, known as the Indian Rebellion, or the Sepoy Mutiny, erupts. Indian soldiers, or sepoys, rise up against the company's rule. It's a brutal conflict, and when it's over, the British government decides to take direct control of India. India officially becomes a British colony, with Queen Victoria proclaimed as the Empress of India. The troubles begin: world wars and independence movements. As the 20th century dawns, cracks start to appear in the empire. The First World War erupts in 1914, dragging Britain and its colonies into a brutal conflict. Soldiers from across the empire fight for Britain, but the war takes a heavy toll. Economies are strained, lives are lost, and people begin to question whether this empire is really worth it. After the war, independence movements grow stronger, especially in India. Leaders like Mahatma Gandhi call for independence through non-violent protest. The British government tries to hold on, but the pressure keeps building. Then, in 1939, World War II breaks out, and Britain is plunged into yet another massive conflict. This time, the empire is stretched to its limits. By the end of the war in 1945, Britain is financially exhausted and facing a world that's changed forever. The empire falls apart. In the years following World War II, the British Empire begins to unravel. India gains its independence in 1947, marking the start of a wave of decolonization. One by one, colonies around the world push for independence. African nations, Caribbean islands, Asian territories, all want to be free. Britain, weakened by the war, doesn't have the resources to keep its empire together. It starts to grant independence to its colonies, some peacefully, others through conflict. The Suez Crisis in 1956, when Britain tried to control the Suez Canal in Egypt, showed the world that the days of the British Empire were over. The US and the Soviet Union emerged as superpowers, and Britain was no longer the dominant force it once was. What remains today? Today, the British Empire is gone, but its legacy lives on in the Commonwealth, a group of former British colonies that still maintain ties with Britain. Some countries, like Canada and Australia, still recognize the British monarch as their head of state. English is spoken around the world. British laws and customs have influenced countless nations, and the impact of the empire is still felt in politics, culture, and society. The rise and fall of the British Empire is a story of ambition, adventure, and power, but also of conflict, exploitation, and loss. It's a reminder of how a small island nation can reach for the stars, only to realize that no empire lasts forever.